Ruth Pollard, the managing editor of the opinion team here in Asia. And with me are two colleagues and long-term India watchers, Mihir Sharma, columnist and author, and Nisid Hajari, also an author, but from Bloomberg's editorial board. And we're all coming to you tonight from Tokyo for this big night of politics. Well, if you were to believe the exit polls, this vote should have been done and dusted. They had Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his ruling BJP set for a landslide victory, and the opposition alliance left in the dust. Many, including our own India columnist Andy Mukherjee, who was meant to be on this live stream, but who's busy writing a column right now, urged caution in interpreting those polls, and he was right. There was little doubt that Modi's government would be returned, but it looks to have fallen short of a parliamentary majority. And that's not something that we would have expected at the beginning of this marathon 6-week-long election campaign. So Mihir, I want to come to you first. Could you lay out for listeners just exactly what we know at the end of this vote count? There's still about 50 constituencies across the country that remain too close to call, but events seem to have taken a turn for the worse for Narendra Modi.
Yes, thank you, Ruth, and thank you for organizing this at short notice. It really appears that many of us who had locked in the assumption that Prime Minister Narendra Modi would retain a majority, and some of us believe that he might even increase his majority in Parliament, we were all wrong. And I think it's time first to acknowledge that. The fact is that whatever may happen in the remaining seats that are yet to be declared, Mr. Modi will have to be a lot more watchful of what his alliance partners say and do than he has to have been so far. He has not cared ever since he has become prime minister in 2014 about what any other party has had to say. This is not how Indian politics has worked until Mr. Modi came along. But now we are back into an age of alliances. It appears that Indian voters, as a group, as an aggregate, were tired of an age in which Mr. Modi made all the decisions by himself.
So did we, just staying with you for a bit longer, Mihir, did we underestimate Indian voters in all of this? I mean, you've just published a column now that noted that things all seem to be going so well. India was destined to see a steady 8% growth, and that should have meant happy voters and a prime minister at the top of his game, both at home and abroad. So what went wrong in all of this?
I think that Mr. Modi, his party, his government had such control of the narrative machine that most of us in the media, in India's cities, believed what he was telling us, that he had complete control. And it is possible that nobody outside some members of the opposition who were particularly perceptive even knew that there was this level of discontent across India's heartland. The northern state of Uttar Pradesh, in fact, has handed Mr. Modi a defeat, which is completely startling given that he swept that state twice. It is the foundation of his power. It is a state from which he himself stands in parliament. And very, very few voices, whether in that state, in the BJP, in the media in general, would have been able to predict that prior to today. It's not just that we underestimated India's voters, it's that we failed at listening to them, which is something that I think a lot of people across the world are familiar with doing. Sometimes we just lose track of what the voters actually believe. We get lost in the messaging.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense and certainly rings true, not just in India, as you say, but across other democracies as well. Nisid, I want to bring you in here. Mihir's mentioned, the global community. Certainly one of the big achievements of Modi's time in power across the two terms since 2014 has been lifting India's profile on the world stage and really positioning it as an important and powerful player in global politics. Modi's been welcomed in the White House, on the floor of Congress, on the floor of Australia's Parliament, and he's bear hugged his way around the world. So could you talk to us a little bit about India's importance on the global stage, and in particular how the US and other nations really have grown to see India as an important buffer against China and its increasing assertiveness in the region?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Ruth. I think that's exactly right. Mr. Modi, he's benefited from playing a strong hand in some ways. India is in a central position right now in terms of particular U.S. strategy towards the Indo-Pacific, which you can tell just from the way that the terminology has changed to Indo-Pacific. I mean, India is seen as a potential defense partner, a security partner in the Indian Ocean region, a source of potential defense co-production, a place where you can make weapons and so on. A source of alternate supply chains, right? If you're trying to de-risk your supply chains from China, you need another source where there's abundant labor and manufacturing potential that you trust and that has a government that you can work with. And so the U.S., especially through the Quad, along with Japan and Australia, has been positioning India for this. And I think that would have been true no matter who is in power in India. It's a function of the way geopolitics is changing now. It's a function of the way that other countries in Asia also view India. I think in some ways countries like Japan find it quite appealing to work with another democracy, a big democracy that has some strengths that can complement their own. And so it's a relationship that importance is not going to change now, no matter who wins the election or what kind of coalition is in power. I think this is a relationship based on interests. U.S. interests are the same as they were today as they were yesterday. I think India's are probably the same.
I want to come back to you on that because obviously US interests and India's interests sort of certainly align on many important things, but they can also split on issues like democratic backsliding, religious intolerance. So let's park that and come back to it in a little bit. Mihir, I wanted to go back to you and talk a little bit about UP. I mean, UP has been seen as very much a stronghold of Modi's BJP. And certainly one of the potential, replacement leaders, Yogi Adityanath is chief minister in Uttar Pradesh. We've also seen in Uttar Pradesh some of the worst cases of religious intolerance, of terrible violence and caste-based discrimination happening against workers, against Muslims, and against other religious minorities. So what are we to make of the fact that UP voters have turned their backs on the BJP in such a significant way?
Well, I think that, first of all, the BJP is still a very, very large, has a very, very large vote share in UP. So it's not that they have completely turned their backs on the BJP. The BJP has won multiple seats there. It's in the fight for others. And its vote share is a lot stronger than its seat share in UP would suggest. That said, something has changed in UP since the last general election, since the last local election, in which, as you said, the UP Chief Minister and Modi ally, Adityanath, was re-elected with a sweeping 3/4 majority, I think. And I would hesitate to make very grand statements about whether this demonstrates that the people of UP have rediscovered the light of liberalism after a few years in which they flirted with the darker sides of human nature. I think it's much more likely that very basic political calculations were overlooked by the BJP through overconfidence in that state. UP politics has often depended upon caste calculation, upon which candidate stands in which geographical location. It's a very complicated state with many, many different interest groups. And it is entirely possible that the BJP just played the politics of the state wrong, that it put the wrong people, summoned some people from Delhi, put senior ministers in locations where they eventually wound up trailing. All of this looks like it was a bad political job. And we can talk in a bit maybe about how the BJP, a party with a reputation for perfect political jobs, has maybe screwed up this one. But I think that is probably the most likely explanation for what's happened in UP.
Oh, and Nisid, maybe I could ask you to weigh in on this. We've talked a little bit about what's happened in the Hindi heartland of the north, but as you and me here would know, Andy Mukherjee has written quite a bit on this massive divide between the north of India, the populous, poor north of India, and the more prosperous, less populated south of India. Are there any lessons that we can learn from the outcomes of this election about that north-south divide?
Well, I mean, I think it's complicated. Mihir would know the details better, but the BJP did make some inroads in the South in this election, not as many as they had hoped or as they predicted, and vice versa. I mean, they obviously lost quite a bit more in the North than anyone would have expected. I think it is, as we said at the beginning, it's a testament to the unpredictability of voters and the fact that you actually have to pay attention to what voters want at certain specific times, what issues they care about. It's not that you can sort of assume this demographic, that caste, this state will always go in one way or another. I mean, voters get a vote, and what they've shown is that matters, and that they can change their minds, and that they need to be have attention paid to them, not just by local leaders, international leaders, but even by international leaders, right? I think it's got to be very easy for world leaders over the last 10 years to assume Modi was India, because that was a message that he tried to promote, that the BJP tried to promote as well. He was the interlocutor that they would work with, and it was easy to assume that how the BJP saw India was the way most Indians saw India. I think this is a good reminder that other states, other countries need to pay attention to the whole of the country and maintain relationships with other parties, with local leaders, and so on, and understand the country in all its complexity, not just through one man or one party in New Delhi.
Sure, and Mihir, you mentioned that we should discuss not just the volatility of voters, but the fact that this political party that appeared to be able to walk on water and do no wrong maybe miscalculated this time round and messed up the big opportunity for the supermajority for a third term. Apart from not listening to the voters, what else do you think could have gone wrong behind the scenes for the BJP in this election?
I think two things we need to look at. The first is that there has been a giant project over the past 10 years to turn the least privileged, historically most excluded parts of India's population, the Dalits, who have, according to the traditional caste system, been considered the lowest, within quotes, rung of the Indian population. They've been encouraged to become part of the broader umbrella of Indian, castes under Hinduism, that the BJP's Hindu philosophy. It looks very much now, and we will have to wait for the detailed breakups over the next week to determine this for certain. But it looks very much for now as if this project has hit a bit of a snag. And the areas which were dominated by Dalit voters have not voted for the BJP to the degree that they had earlier. In at least one seat in UP, a firebrand young Dalit leader named Chandrasekhar, who is, almost a militant, a Black Panther-like figure, has been voted in as the MP. He's a very sort of inspiring individual, but very rare also in today's India. He was jailed under the BJP government for a while, but he's become a parliamentarian. So there is an upsurge there that again we have to look at. The other point is that most of the reporting from the field prior to this election, although it did not catch the level of dissatisfaction with the government, did note that many people were worried about the fact that no jobs had been made available. And that is matched by the overall data, both from private sector surveys and from the government's own large-scale surveys when it releases them. there is a jobs crisis in India, and the jobs crisis has turned, it appears, into sufficient dissatisfaction that Modi's party has underperformed. Once again, it's not the only thing at work, but it's probably a large proportion of why they haven't done as well as they were expected to.
And I mean, jobs was a platform, along with increasing farm wages by some 20%, I think, was something that Modi campaigned on in both 2014 and 2019 when he came to re-election. And until now, he seems to have been given a pass on not creating jobs and not lifting farm wages. And now you have a situation where the one sector of India's economy, which has been until now, a great hope in terms of moving people out of farming and agriculture and into a higher part of the value chain, which is the outsourcing and tech sector. Now that is even under threat from AI. And other global pressures. So in some ways it feels like it's not a surprise that that people would be losing faith in the government's ability to create jobs, even in a high value sector like outsourcing and technical services. And so, I mean, did the government miss the opportunity here? Did it miss the chance to create a booming service sector while it was focused too much on perhaps infrastructure and other building projects at the expense of building the service economy?
The government took a big bet, Ruth, a little while ago, that if it spent a lot of money on infrastructure, the private sector would respond with large-scale investment, and that into manufacturing, into a couple of other things, and that would create a sort of jobs revolution, even in places where traditionally the private sector has not been trusted as an employer. So the heartland of India, like UP, as an example. That bet has not quite paid off. And I think that whoever takes over these crucial sectors next, and we must presume that it will be Mr. Modi, but we don't know now what his cabinet will look like, will have to think very hard about what is actually stopping the expansion of work in these areas. Much of it is skilling. A lot of it is education. It's not just that you need to build roads to a lot of these places. It is also that you need to give people opportunities to upskill themselves. You need to give them a sense that upskilling themselves will result in a more secure life. What people across the north of India actually want and demand from their politicians is something that politicians cannot provide, which is an unlimited number of government jobs. What politicians need to figure out is actually what they're asking for when they ask for a government job. They're asking for security, they're asking for a ladder to prosperity, they're asking for a place to stay and some respect in society. There are other ways in which those have to be provided, and I think that I'm sure that Narendra Modi has looked at these results and said, well, it turns out I probably wasn't providing them well enough.
And Nisid, you mentioned before India's critical role in, the supply chain as it moves away from solely focusing on China to a more China plus one strategy. And we're looking at everything from India assembling iPhones to welcoming semiconductor companies that want to build fabs in India. How will this period of unstable coalitions that India looks like it might be going into, how will it affect those big relationships? Because they are critical to India's economic growth.
They are. But in a lot of ways, when these companies are coming and looking at India and deciding whether to build a fab or build a factory, they're not building these in New Delhi, right? They're going to specific states that have specific policies that are appealing to them and have infrastructure, have a workforce available who they can work with, which is why so many of these factories are being set up in the south, where things tend to run a bit better and so on. So I think companies are still going to be making their decisions based on those things. The key question will be, will whatever government comes in now, as Mihir said, take a look at and appreciate why there has been more of this investment. There were some very high-profile examples, Apple, obviously, Micron, and so on, but nowhere near the number of the amount of investment of the number of factories that you're going to need to create the millions and millions of jobs that need to be created. And there are many reasons for that. Skilling, obviously, as Mihir said, tariff policy has been working against some of this. Land and labor reforms would make things easier. And these are all things that, I think people have assumed can only be done if you have a strong leader in New Delhi and a very powerful government. I'm not so sure. I mean, India has made pretty big reforms under coalition governments in the past, and if you can build consensus among different groups, rather than just sort of trying to ram something through, quickly overnight and provoking a backlash, then I think those reforms can be more possible. The question is, are they recognized as urgently needed? Can you build consensus around the right ones and then move forward from there?
And just staying with you for a bit, Nisid, I mean, unstable coalitions are also not really welcome when you're trying to build defence alliances across a region that's already experiencing such turmoil, certainly in the South China Sea, with the Philippines and around Taiwan, for example. How are India's security partners, like, as you mentioned, the Quad, Australia, Japan, the US, and other nations in the region, how will they be looking at this election result, and what will they be hoping will come out of a newly built coalition with, as you say, the BJP still being a dominant partner in that coalition?
I think they'll be looking for consistency, right? I mean, I think, excluding some voices on the extremes on both sides, I think, India has gradually come to a consensus around a generally pro-Western geopolitical outlook. That doesn't mean they're going to be an ally of the U.S. That doesn't mean they're not going to criticize the U.S. and other Western countries on a whole host of things. But fundamentally, they're moving away from Russia. They're obviously not moving anywhere near China, and so they recognize that their future lies with the West. This is the markets that are going to buy their goods. This is going to be the countries that will supply technology and weapons that they need. They will be destinations for migrants from India, skilled migrants who can go out and send back remittances and so on. So, I think that fundamental platform is there and should be shared by any government that comes in. I mean, things may be a little bit slower here and there on the edges, but the general direction of travel will most likely continue in the same way.
And so let's talk about what this coalition might look like. And actually, maybe step back from that. Let's talk about how the opposition managed to gain ground in a way that it hasn't managed to gain ground in the previous decade, over 2 elections of massive thumping landslide victories for Modi and his BJP. What was different this time round? Was it simply that the coalition led by the Congress Party with other significant regional parties like the All India Trinamool Congress from West Bengal? Was it just that, and of course the Samajwadi Party in UP, was it just that they decided to run together this time and not compete against each other for critical seats that was the turning point for the opposition? Or was there something more that was the glue that held these disparate groups together? Mihir, do you want to take that?
I actually don't think that there was any, opposition unity has been tried in the past. We've had grand coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
In some places, the opposition was in fact less united in this election than it has been in previous assembly or national elections. I think we have to give the credit here to the leadership of the Congress Party. I mean, Rahul Gandhi, who's the sort of current scion of this sort of dynasty of theirs, has been around for a while, losing election after election, and it seemed that his logic always was that if we retain our values and we keep on making our case to the people, at some point we will return, if not to power, but we will return to being at least a contender. And I think that was universally laughed at till around 10 a.m. India time this morning. And it turns out that everybody else in India was wrong. And Rahul Gandhi was right, that you just plug away at it. It's Indian politics, it turns out, is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And this is a man who walked across the country. So he knows a bit about marathons.
Has it been a problem, though, that there was no, I mean, the opposition coalition didn't offer up any leadership candidate in this election? There was no one who they were offering up as an alternative to Modi. Maybe that played in their favor in the end.
You know, it's Ruth. You've touched on something that I feel very strongly about. This notion that in a parliamentary system we should offer up a presidential candidate offends me. It is an Americanization of a system that has its own proud history. The idea essentially is that in India, the Modi and the BJP had successfully nationalized successive elections. They had successfully turned them into personality presidential contests. And on that field, they would always have an advantage. There is no other individual who would be able to match Modi's connection with people. So the only counter argument that the opposition could have against him was, look, we happen to understand local issues better. Here is this candidate who is supposed to be your representative, who understands your issues better than whatever candidate Modi has given you. And that is how the system is supposed to work. And it is likely, not certain, but it is possible that that is how the system worked on this occasion. So it may be the case that if they had sought to copy the BJP, create a more unified structure, find an individual who they would prop up, they may not have done as well as they have, because the individual would have been compared negatively, almost certainly, to the Prime Minister.
So I know it's very difficult to crystal ball what's going to happen over the next 24, 48 hours in India. But as you've both noted, it looks like there will be a third term for the BJP, albeit with a significantly slimmed down majority. What does a new government look like? Is Modi under pressure at this point, given there was talk of 400 seats at the beginning of this election campaign, and I haven't seen the latest count from the Election Commission yet, but they're obviously be lucky to reach 300, right? So is Modi under pressure?
Frankly, anyone's guess is as good as the Prime Minister is a closed book to everyone, including me. But the chances are that what we know for certain is that he has never had to consider the desires or inclinations of a coalition partner before. In his decades in public life, he has always staked out his own path. He has defied, when he was chief minister, he defied the national leadership of his own party. He was a rebellious chief minister. As prime minister, he has not really had any allies that who he has had to woo and keep within a coalition. It's going to be an adjustment for a man who is in his 70s and has never had to make adjustments. It is his first defeat in politics. So there are multiple ways in which most of us in India just struggle to imagine the prime minister that we've seen over the 10 years operating with the constraints of other prime ministers that we've seen. How would that happen? This is going to be fascinating to watch over the next few months. And it may be the case that the force of his personality is such, and the fear that he continues to inspire across the political system is such, that his allies will continue to treat him as if he has a majority until one day they wake up. But who knows? It's going to be really fascinating to watch.
Agreed. And of course, I mean, I guess some of India's global partners, like the US, for example, might be quietly relieved that that the omnipotency of Modi has been removed a little. I mean, certainly Joe Biden, the US president, has been criticised for not raising India's democratic backsliding more loudly, and not talking more about the very clear and loud campaign that the BJP has run against Muslim citizens of India. And so, Nisid, I wonder, will partners of India be breathing a quiet sigh of relief that Modi isn't coming out of this as powerfully as we thought he would be?
I think it's quite possible. I mean, I think no one would admit to this publicly, but it is something that has always caused friction in the U.S.-India relationship. As many interests as the two countries share, there's a certain lack of trust because of this perception that there's been growing illiberalism within India, right? And if you look at the relationship between the U.S. and Japan, for instance, there's just a much greater degree of reliability and assurance and trust between them, whereas the U.S.-India relationship is to some degree transactional, and that's something that maybe India prefers. I think the U.S. would prefer something a little less transactional, and a result like this, and even more than that, just a reaffirmation that India remains a very, very powerful democracy, right? I mean, the opposition achieved these results despite quite a few roadblocks being thrown in their way, candidates being thrown in jail, being investigated, accounts being frozen, so on. All these things that have been noted in the past, and still they were able to perform this well, which testifies to the strength of Indian democracy. So I think that will be reassuring to many governments outside in the West.
So I think we're coming up to the end of our 30 minutes. So I'll just throw it to both of you for final comments. Obviously there's going to be a fair bit of chaos over the coming 24, 48 hours. Mihir, what are your thoughts about any fresh personalities that we may see emerging onto the political scene or coming into the spotlight as a result of this surprise in the election outcome?
Well, thanks, Ruth. I think that's a really important question. There are going to be two kingmakers that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And those are the two largest allies of the BJP. There is Chandrababu Naidu, who is a pro-business chief minister, former chief minister of the southern state of Andhra Pradesh. He's going to be chief minister in Hyderabad again. He created Hyderabad as a IT destination. He's going to be chief minister of Andhra Pradesh again. Andhra Pradesh no longer includes the city that Chandrababu Naidu was once associated with, which is Hyderabad. He is very interested in creating a new city that will replicate the success of Hyderabad. And so he's got major projects. But he's also someone who makes a good case for his state and has jumped coalitions before. As has the other kingmaker, who is the chief minister of the northern state of Bihar, which is very different from Andhra Pradesh, much poorer, many fewer jobs on offer, but very ambitious, and that is a gentleman named Nitish Kumar. And these are people who do not, in their hearts, think they are in any way inferior to the prime minister. And they will want to see themselves in a coalition, even if they have a fraction of the BJP seats, as his equal. And I think we're going to have to keep an eye on them, because they will help determine the future of Indian policy in major ways, if Modi lets them. And I don't see how he can stop them from doing that.
And Nisid, from a global perspective, I mean, who is the US and its partners going to be looking to as India comes out of this big surprise and looks to form the next government?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it will still be Mr. Modi, because as long as he can pull together this coalition and still lead it, he will be the foremost figure there. But, something, as Mihir and I have discussed in the past, so much of Modi's mystique and his command of the political world within India is based on his reputation as a winner. He's won every election. and his propaganda machine portrays, even the smallest achievements as massive victories. This is a loss, and there's no way to sugarcoat it, right? I mean, you can't just pretend that this was somehow a great victory for him. That's going to weaken him. It's going to inspire rivals, presumably. There are many people, as Mihir said, who have their own political ambitions, who have had to keep them relatively subdued for 10 years now, and nobody's getting any younger. So I think he's going to have his hands full dealing with that.
Okay, well, I think that's a good point to wrap it up. And I want to thank both of you very much for joining so late on this Tuesday evening. Thank you to Mihir Sharma, columnist, and Nisid Hajari, a member of our editorial board here at Bloomberg. Thank you to Michael Johnson and Christine van den Bijlaart, our producers, and thank you very much to the listeners for tuning into this Bloomberg Opinion live stream on India elections. I'm sure we'll be back here again next week when things become a little bit clearer. But until then, thank you very much and have a good evening.